بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. So we're in the section regarding the conditions of the prayer. The conditions of the prayer. And we covered the first few and we got up to the fifth condition of the prayer, which is istiqbalul qibla, facing the qibla. That is one of the conditions of the prayer, to face the qibla direction when starting the prayer. And that is mentioned in the Quran, وَمِنْ حَيْثُ خَرَجْتَ فَوَلِّ وَجْهَكَ شَطْرَ الْمَسْجِدِ الْحَرَامِ وَحَيْثُ مَا كُنْتُمْ فَوَلُّوا وُجُوهَكُمْ شَطْرَهُ. This ayah mentions about facing towards al-Masjid al-Haram, which is the Kaaba. لكن العلماء يقولون من أمكنه أن يشاهد الكعبة وجب أن يستقبل عين الكعبة، ومن ثم وضعت الجهة المسؤولة عن المسجد الحرام خطوطا صغيرة زرقاء على البلاط حتى يعرف بها المصلي استقبال الكعبة. So when you pray, you must face the direction of the Qibla. Unless you are actually in the Haram or you are in the vicinity of the Kaaba. If you are in the vicinity of the Kaaba, then you're supposed to look directly to the direction of the Kaaba. From here, we are going to face the general direction of where Mecca is. But if you are there, then you must face exactly into the direction of the Qibla. If you're in the mosque, Al-Masjid al-Haram, the mosque in Mecca, the tiling, the marble on the floor, the way it's been organized and the lines of it, they all face towards the Qibla. So wherever you are in the mosque, you can just look down and you'll see the direction of the floor, and it all leads to the direction of the Qibla exactly. So if you're there, you have to be facing into the direction exactly. If you're here now far away in another country, then you're facing the general direction of the Kaaba. أما من كان لا يشاهد الكعبة فيلزمه استقبال الجهة. So here where we cannot see the Kaaba directly, what we must do is face to the direction towards Mecca, towards where the Kaaba is. The scholars, they say, if you are in the mosque, if you are in the mosque itself in Mecca, then you face the Kaaba directly. And if you are in Mecca, then you face the direction of the mosque. And if you are outside of Mecca, then you face the direction of Mecca. And that is the three levels. If you're in the mosque itself, you face the Qibla directly. If you're in Mecca somewhere, then you face the direction of the mosque. And if you're outside of Mecca, then you face the direction of Mecca generally. Those are the directions depending where you are. And that's why some of the scholars, they say, if you're right in front of the Kaaba, you're there, that when you pray, it is the opinion of some of the scholars that you actually look at the Kaaba. Rather than looking down to the ground, you actually look at the Kaaba. That is the opinion of some of the scholars. And others, they say, no, you still look at the place of prostration. Also, the scholars have mentioned, if you are in another country, you're at a distance, then a small change or a small degree of being off in the direction doesn't affect anything. People, they think now you got to get the compass and get the exact point something degree to face the Qibla. It's not a necessity. If you are slightly off, it doesn't make a difference. The point is, from this country, other countries, you have to be facing the general direction towards the Kaaba. It doesn't have to be the point something compass direction precisely on there. That's why some of the scholars even say, in a mosque, for example, if the direction of the mosque is just slightly off, maybe you have a building like this now, and the direction isn't straight, it's just slightly off. The scholars, they say it's no problem to make your row straight, to make it convenient with the building and easy to make the rows and to straighten the rows. A slight deflection makes no difference. So from the distances that are far away, it doesn't make a difference to have a slight deflection, or if you're slightly off, the point then is to be generally in that direction towards the Kaaba. However, now the Shaykh is going to explain, فَمَنْ صَلَّى إِلَى غَيْرِ الْقِبْلَةِ فَصَلَاتُهُ بَاطِلَةٌ غَيْرُ صَحِيحَةٌ وَلَا مُبْرِئَةٌ لِذِمَّتِهِ إِلَّا فِي أَحْوَالٍ أَرْبَعَةٍ. If you now pray not facing the Qibla, then your prayer is invalid. If you pray in a direction not facing the Qibla, then your prayer is invalid, except in 4 circumstances where it can still be valid, even though you're not facing the Qibla. 4 circumstances where your prayer can still be valid, even though you're not praying towards the Qibla. The first circumstance where your prayer would still be valid, even though you're not facing the Qibla, the Kaaba, إذا كان عاجزا عن استقبال القبلة. If somebody is incapable of facing the Qibla. If somebody is incapable of facing towards the Qibla. How could a person be incapable? For example, مثل أن يكون مريضا وجهه إلى غير القبلة. Somebody who is sick and he is facing in a direction other than the Qibla and cannot move himself. For example, somebody who has some severe issue, he's in a hospital bed and he cannot maneuver or move himself, and his bed is facing in a direction other than the Qibla. And there's nobody to come, and even if they can come, they cannot move his bed physically to the direction of the Qibla. He is in a medical condition where he can't move his body. He is stuck in the direction where he is lying down on the bed, whatever that direction is. So now in that circumstance, when the person is stuck, medically he's in that bed, wherever it's facing, he can't do anything. They can't even move the bed, there's no space, nothing. So in that circumstance, when the prayer time comes in, he would pray, even though he's not facing the Qibla, and his prayer would be valid, because he is in a situation where he is incapable of facing the Qibla. He's incapable in that scenario. And that is based upon the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ. Fear Allah to the best of your ability. So in that example the Shaykh gives of a person in that scenario, they're in a hospital bed, they have some serious medical condition, their bed is facing in a certain direction, not the direction of the Kaaba, it cannot be moved, they cannot physically get up and move, they are stuck in the direction they are in wherever the bed is facing. So then they have no choice, they are incapable of facing the Kaaba, they pray to the direction they are facing, and their prayer would be valid. The second circumstance where your prayer would still be valid even though you're not facing the Qibla, the Kaaba. The second circumstance would be إذا كان خائفا من عدو أو كان هاربا واتجاهه إلى غير القبلة. If a person was fearful of an enemy, a person was fearful of an enemy chasing him. Maybe he is fleeing from an enemy, or there is some fear of the enemy, and that enemy is coming in the direction of the Qibla, from that direction. So you are fleeing in the opposite direction. So now in that type of circumstance, when you have to stop and pray, then in that case you pray in the direction you're able to pray, and your prayer would still be valid. ومعلوم أن الخائف قد يكون اتجاهه إلى القبلة وقد يكون اتجاهه إلى غير القبلة، فإذا رخص الله له في الصلاة راجلا أو راكبا مقتضى ذلك أن يرخص له في الاتجاه. So this is perhaps in the circumstances of jihad going on, or some circumstance of that nature, and there are enemies from the direction of the Qibla, you are therefore fleeing or going to a different direction, then you pray in the circumstance you are in, the enemy is preventing you from facing the Qibla, you face where you are facing and pray, and your prayer would still be valid. The third circumstance where your prayer is still valid even if you're not facing the Qibla, إذا كان في سفر وأراد أن يصلي النافلة. The third circumstance is if you are traveling and you decide to pray a supererogatory prayer. If you are traveling and you decide to pray a supererogatory prayer, nafil prayer. A nafil prayer whilst traveling can be done in a direction other than the Qibla. ثبت ذلك عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أنه كان يصلي في السفر حيث كان وجهه إلا أنه لا يصلي المكتوبة. It's mentioned that the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, when he was on his donkey, his horse, and he was traveling somewhere, that for the nafil prayers, he would pray on his donkey, his horse, camel, he would pray on it, whichever direction the animal was traveling in, even if it was not the direction of the Qibla. That is established in a hadith. It mentions in Al-Bukhari and Muslim, Amir ibn Rabi'a, he said, رأيت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وهو على الراحلة يسبح يومئ برأسه قبل أي وجه توجه ولم يكن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يصنع ذلك في الصلاة المكتوبة. He said, I saw the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم on his riding animal, يسبح, meaning doing the readings of the prayer, and that he was indicating with his head. He was sitting on top of his camel or his horse or his donkey, and he was praying as the donkey was moving along, or the horse or the camel was moving along. He was praying, and he was doing the ruku' and the sujood with his head, simply bowing the head for the ruku' and then bowing the head for the sujood. And he was sitting on his riding animal, and the riding animal is walking along whichever direction it's walking along. It's not necessarily facing the Qibla. And so that was done. But the narrator says, I never saw the messenger doing that for obligatory prayers. The fard prayers, the 5 daily obligatory prayers, you cannot do that for them. This is only the sunnah prayers or the nafil prayers, the optional prayers, that this can be done. The fourth circumstance or scenario where you could pray your prayer in a direction which is not facing the Qibla and your prayer would still be valid is إذا كان قد اشتبهت عليه القبلة فلا يدري أي الجهات تكون ففي هذه الحال يتحرى بقدر ما يستطيع ويتجه حيث غلب على ظنه أن تلك الجهة هي القبلة، ولا إعادة عليه لو تبين له فيما بعد أنه صلى إلى غير القبلة. The fourth circumstance is, what is the fourth circumstance? The first one was if you're incapable. The second one was if there's some enemy or something preventing you facing that way. The third one was the supererogatory prayers when traveling. The fourth circumstance, what is it? Where your prayer would still be valid even if you didn't face the Qibla.
If the Qibla direction is doubtful.
Exactly. If you don't know where the Qibla direction is, maybe you're in a circumstance, maybe you're camping, you're somewhere, some circumstance where you have no device, no compass, no light, no sun, nothing to be able to work out what the directions are and where the Qibla is. Maybe possible, you could be in that type of circumstance. So if that type of circumstance occurs and you cannot work out where the Qibla is, you cannot work it out, so then what do? You try to the best of your ability to use whatever evidences you have to estimate where the Qibla is supposed to be, and then you pray. For example, like these days it might happen. Imagine you're traveling on the motorway. In the UK especially, dull, dark, grey, cloudy, rain, you're traveling on the motorway and maybe it's coming up to the time of Maghrib and you haven't prayed your Dhuhr and Asr yet because you're traveling. But it's coming up to Maghrib now. You can see on your clock, on your watch, Maghrib is about to come in. So you got to stop and pray your Dhuhr and Asr. Even if you're traveling, you can't pray your Dhuhr and Asr after Maghrib time. So now you stop and you get out of your car close to Maghrib time on a wet, cloudy day in the UK, and you have no idea where the sunset is. You can't see a thing, it's already pitch black, even though it's an hour before Maghrib in the winter in the UK. So you stop your car, you get out at the side of the motorway or a services or something, and you cannot work out where the Qibla is. Your phone is dead, no compass, no nothing. So now you're in the middle of nowhere on the motorway somewhere. You've no idea really where the Qibla is. You have to work it out to the best of your ability. And there are things you can do. Any common sense, a bit of logic, so you know you're on the motorway and you know the general direction. You should know the general direction you're traveling. Somebody, for example, coming up the M6. So you know you're generally heading north. So you can generally therefore estimate that if your car was heading north, you get out of your car, you can estimate therefore if that's north, that's south, that's east and that's west. You've roughly worked out roughly the directions. They may not be accurate because the M6 is not a straight line from south to north. You could be on a section of it where you're actually almost facing east or actually almost facing west where it turns. But a rough idea at least. A rough idea, you're generally going north, so you can generally work out east, and you can therefore generally assume where the Qibla is supposed to be and pray. After that, as you get back in your car, then you suddenly find your charger. You didn't know you had it. And you stick it in, and your phone charges up, and you have a quick look at the compass, and you realize you actually got it very wrong. So now what? Do you have to stop your car and pray again?
No, you don't.
You don't. You don't have to pray again. In that kind of scenario where you didn't know at all really, and you made your best guess based upon whatever factors you could use, you made your best guess and you prayed to the best estimate. You realize afterwards actually your estimate was a little bit off. But if you realize afterwards it was off, you don't have to repeat your prayer in that circumstance. In that circumstance, the prayer is valid. So those are 4 circumstances where your prayer would still be valid even though you're not facing the Qibla. Your prayer would still be valid even though you are not facing the Qibla. Outside of those four circumstances, then you must face the Qibla. It is a condition, and remember, a condition of the prayer is something you have to do before you actually start praying. That's what conditions are. Conditions of the prayer are things that must be done prior to starting the prayer. So a condition of the prayer is to face the Qibla, meaning you've got to stand up and face the direction of the Qibla before you say Allahu Akbar and start. So that is a condition, and those are the four exceptions to it. We then come up to the sixth condition of the prayer. That was the fifth one, facing the Qibla. The sixth condition of the prayer is an-niyyah, the intention that has to be made. An-niyyah shartun li sihhati as-salah. The intention is a condition for the validity of the prayer. وكل إنسان لا يمكن أن يتوضأ ويأتي إلى المسجد ويصلي إلا وهو ناو لأن النية لا تحتاج إلى عمل ولا تحتاج إلى تفكير ولا تتبع في استحضارها. So the intention for the prayer, when a person makes wudu, you look at your clock and it's time for the prayer, so you get up and go start making wudu. Now, when you get up and go and start making wudu, the general intention of the prayer is already there. Why have you got up to make wudu? Because you have in your mind, I need to pray. That's why you've got up to make wudu right now at the time of the prayer, to pray. So the intention is there. Generally, the intention is that it's like if you leave your home to go to the mosque. You leave your home, you go in the car, you go to the mosque, and then you pray. Did you have an intention or not? Obviously. The whole fact of the matter that you went from your house outside into your car to the mosque, parked up, went inside, all of that because you have the intention to pray. Then you could say there is a specific intention people talk about for every prayer, but that specific intention is not how people teach you. When they say that at the beginning of the prayer, like for example Isha now, that you stand and you say, or before you say Allahu Akbar, so you make your intention and you say, I am going to pray 4 raka'at Isha behind the Imam for the sake of Allah, in this mosque, 4 raka'at, and all these things that people say on there as an intention, like a script. That scripted intention is not necessary and it's not needed. And there is no sunnah to make an intention like that I am here now in this mosque behind this Imam, I'm going to pray 4 raka'at Isha for the sake of Allah, and you're scripting this whole intention. There is no need for that. Shaykh al-Uthaymeen used to joke about it. He used to say, if you're going to say all of that, I'm here behind this Imam, I'm going to pray 4 raka'at Isha for the sake of Allah in al-Masjid al-Haram. He used to say, you might as well add, standing next to my neighbor Khalid from street so-and-so, and on the left of me is my other neighbor Anas, and I'm praying the 4 raka'at. And he used to joke, you might as well add up the whole life story. There's no need for that scripted kind of intention. Your intention is, you are now, like now, if you go Isha time, you're approaching that prayer with the intention of Isha. It's not like you have to stop at the beginning of the prayer and think now, Isha, 4 raka'at for Allah. It's not necessary to do that scripted type of intention. It's an intention in your mind to pray that particular prayer. You know what prayer it is, what time it is, and you're doing that intention for the sake of Allah, to pray that prayer for the sake of Allah. فَلَوْ أَتَيْتَ مُسْتَعِجِلًا وَالْإِمَامُ يُصَلِّي نعم. Then, اشتراط النية إنما يذكر من أجل التعيين أو التخصيص، أما من حيث الإطلاق فإنه لا يمكن لأحد عاقل مختار أن يقوم فيتوضأ ويذهب يصلي، لا يمكن أن يفعل ذلك ولم يكن قد نوى للصلاة، لكن يبقى النظر هل يشترط تعيين الصلاة. So generally having an intention, that's obvious. When you get up to make wudu, to go to the mosque, you've made the intention generally to pray. But then the specific intention we're talking about now, this specific intention for dhuhr, for asr, for maghrib, do you need to have that specific intention in your mind? So the scholars, they have mentioned, some of them have said, you need to remember the specific prayer. And that makes sense. You need to know that you're going to the mosque to pray Isha, and that's obvious. You go at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, you know in your mind you're going for Dhuhr. You go at 7 o'clock, 6 o'clock, you know in your mind you're going for Maghrib. So that's kind of obvious too. It's there in your mind, the specific intention of which prayer you're going for. So some of the scholars said you do need to do that. You need to have a recollection, an intention of the specific prayer that you're going for. فلو أتيت مستعجلا والإمام يصلي ثم دخلت في الصلاة ولم تستحضر أنها الصلاة الفلانية فلا صلاة لك لعدم التعيين. Some of them said, if you don't remember specifically which prayer you're making your intention for, then your prayer is invalid. They say you've got to have an intention that it is for Dhuhr now, it is for Asr now. You got to remember specifically your intention to which prayer it is. However, some scholars they said, so they said you got to do that. Others they said, يشترط مع نية الصلاة تعيين الصلاة فإن لم تعينها فلم تصح. So according to these scholars, they said you've got to remember specifically which prayer you're making your intention for, and it's not enough to have a general intention. Again, though, that's fairly obvious. When you wake up in the morning and you pray your Fajr, you cannot say afterwards, oh, but I forgot my intention was supposed to be for Fajr. When you get up at that time in the morning and you make wudu, there's nothing in your mind except Fajr prayer. So it's there. That is there. The intention for Fajr is there. You're going to the mosque at Dhuhr time, your intention for Dhuhr is there. If some genuine loss of memory occurred, that you go to Asr one day and you've been so busy all day, you've been preoccupied, you go to Asr, you pray, and you completely lost track of what's going on. You thought you were praying Dhuhr all that time. And you come outside and you realize, wait, that was Asr. So now you could argue maybe that prayer is invalid according to some scholars. Because you thought you were praying a different prayer altogether, and then you realize afterwards, meaning your intention was for a different prayer. For example, it could occur. It's daytime, it's sunny still, and you go and pray and you're so preoccupied and Dhuhr is on your mind. And then you come out and you realize, actually, wait, Dhuhr we prayed, that was Asr I've been praying now. It could happen. According to some scholars, in that circumstance, the prayer would be invalid because your intention was not for the prayer that you prayed. I've heard some scholars say though, if you go to the mosque and that kind of scenario occurs, where you thought it was Dhuhr and you just slipped your mind, and it's Asr you're praying, and the Imam is praying Asr, you're in the Jama'ah for Asr, and then afterwards you realize, I've heard some scholars say, no, your prayer is valid. The Imam was praying Asr with the intention of Asr, the congregation, the Jama'ah was Asr, your prayer is valid. You've gone there, you've prayed Asr. But according to these scholars, they said no. Some of the scholars said no. You got to remember what you're praying. If you forget what you're praying and you think you're praying something else, your intention was somewhere else then. And so you should pray that again. So two opinions basically on that. One opinion saying just the general intention that you're going to pray is enough regardless of which specific prayer. Others they say no, you got to remember exactly which prayer your intention is for it to be valid. A few other points here. Imagine now you're praying a nafil prayer, an optional prayer. And then as you're praying, maybe you have an alarm on your phone or something and it goes off and you realize you got to go somewhere, you're late for some appointment. And so you think to yourself, let me just change the intention of this optional prayer into the fard. Maybe like for example before Dhuhr, You were just praying some nafil prayers before dhuhr or before asr or something. And then you realize you're in a rush. So you think to yourself, let me just change the intention and make this my dhuhr prayer. Or make this my asr prayer. Make this my maghrib prayer. Permissible or not? Meaning, can you change your intention from one prayer to another in the middle of the prayer? From a supererogatory one to an obligatory one. That is impermissible. You cannot change intention from a supererogatory prayer to an obligatory prayer. That's because a supererogatory prayer, a nafil prayer, compared to an obligatory prayer, the supererogatory is higher or lower? Lower. You cannot go from a lower prayer to a higher prayer in the middle of it. Because that would mean the start of your prayer was at the lower level and the rest of your prayer was at the higher level, meaning you have not prayed a full prayer at the higher level. A portion of it at the beginning was at the lower level of nafil, and in that circumstance it is not permissible then. The Shaykh says, he gives an example, he says, إنسان دخل المسجد أو في بيته ثم شرع في الصلاة وكبر على أنها نافلة. So a person begins with a nafil prayer, starts praying Allahu Akbar, then in the middle of the prayer realizes he's late and he hasn't got time, so he thinks, let me just pray the obligatory one, change my intention. The Shaykh says, impermissible, your prayer would not be valid like that, your obligatory prayer would not be covered like that. What about a person is praying an obligatory prayer, and in the middle of the obligatory prayer, he decides to change his intention to a specific nafil prayer. Not just a general nafil, a specific nafil prayer. Again, impermissible. You cannot change your intention from an obligatory prayer to a specific nafil prayer. For example, the Shaykh says, imagine somebody started praying dhuhr. Allahu Akbar, starts praying dhuhr. Then he thinks to himself, but the two sunnah of dhuhr I didn't pray yet. And he thinks, actually, you know what? I got time anyway. Let me just change my intention to the two sunnah first. Let me do the sunnahs of dhuhr first. Let me make this the sunnah. Then I'll start the next prayer again as my obligatory one. Cannot do that. Because those two sunnahs of dhuhr are a specific prayer. Specific sunnahs of dhuhr. So you cannot start a specific prayer with an intention past the takbir at the beginning. If you started the takbir, you can't now change your intention to a specific sunnah prayer. But what if you're praying an obligatory prayer and you want to change your intention to just general nafil prayer? For example, somebody starts praying dhuhr and then they think to themselves, actually, let me just make this a general nafil prayer, not sunnah of dhuhr, not specific prayers. All of the prayers, they have specific sunnahs, 2 sunnah, 4 sunnah. They have sunnahs with each prayer, not those ones. Just a general nafil. Sometimes in some of the books, they even highlight those. They say 2 sunnah, 2 nafil in some of the books and things. So imagine somebody just praying the 2 nafil, general nafil, open-ended, optional prayer. You can change your intention to that. The open-ended nafil prayers that are not specific, you can start the intention for them at any point. So in the middle of the prayer, you could change your obligatory intention into the intention of the open-ended general nafil prayer. Also, another circumstance where you could change your intention in the middle of the prayer is, imagine if somebody was praying by themselves and then somebody comes and lines up with you and taps your shoulder. They want you to become the imam now. So now you got to change your intention because you started your prayer with the intention of just praying by yourself. Now all of a sudden you get the tap and you've become the imam, so your intention changes now. It's the same prayer, but your intention is now as the Imam of that prayer. Whereas before your intention was just praying it by yourself. That is permissible. There's nothing wrong with that. That is permissible. Also, نعم وفي هذا خلاف بين العلماء والصحيح أنه لا بأس به. So there may be some difference with some of these topics, but mostly there is no issue with that. Your intention there is permissible to change. فنية الإمامة بعد أن كان منفردا مثل أن يشرع الإنسان في الصلاة وهو منفرد. Yeah, the example is the same as what we mentioned here. There's an example of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. One night he got up to pray. There's an example where one night the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam got up to pray the night prayer. And so he was praying the night prayer by himself. And during that night prayer, Ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhuma got up and made wudu and came and joined the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He got up, made wudu and came and joined the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the prayer. So when he came and joined the messenger was praying as a single person. He was now praying as the Imam, and Ibn Abbas was the congregation. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam affirmed what Ibn Abbas did. Didn't tell him, no, don't do that, don't join somebody by themselves, because then you're going to make him into the Imam and changes in nothing. All good. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not say anything to Ibn Abbas, indicating that it's permissible to do that, and the person who was praying by himself now carries on the same prayer, everything, but with the intention of being the Imam now. And that is okay, because this hadith in Bukhari and Muslim of the Prophet ﷺ and Ibn Abbas proves it. Another issue here, if you're praying, let's say for example, the Isha prayer in congregation, the Isha prayer in the Jama'ah, in the congregation, your Fard Isha prayer, but the Imam has already prayed Isha and he is now leading you, another group of people, but he's already prayed Isha. He's now leading everybody else, so his intention isn't Isha, his intention is just Nafal. But everybody behind him is praying their Isha. Is that permissible? The Imam doesn't even have the intention of Isha prayer. He's prayed it already. He's just leading them now for them to pray their Isha. Maybe none of them are capable of leading the prayer, so he has to do it, but he already prayed Isha. But he's going to do it so they can pray. Just make the Nafal intention. He can't pray Isha again. So he makes the Nafal intention just to lead them in prayer, because none of them can lead it. And so they can all pray their Isha. And he's praying Nafal now. Permissible or not?
Yeah.
Permissible?
For the Imam will be Nafal. For everyone in the Jama'ah they'll be
So is that allowed? They're praying Isha, but the Imam isn't even praying Isha.
But their intention is separate, right?
So that is permissible. That's permissible. And there is an example of that. At the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, one of the companions, Mu'adh ibn Jabal, radiyallahu anhu, he used to pray in congregation behind the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He used to pray in the congregation behind the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then after he had prayed, he would go back to his area where he lived. So maybe, for example, he used to come to the Prophet's mosque. Medina in those days wasn't huge, where the hotels and everything are. That's what Medina was in those days. So he would come and pray with the Prophet ﷺ leading the prayer, pray behind him, and then he would go back to his area. Maybe his area was a mile away, somewhere over there. Maybe 2 miles away where he lived. He would go back to his area, and there was a mosque in his area. a mile away, 2 miles away, 3 miles away, wherever he was. When he would go back home, there was a mosque in his area. And he was the Imam there. He would lead them in prayer. So he would come and pray Isha behind the Prophet ﷺ in the Jama'ah. So he's prayed his Isha. Then he'd go back to his area and lead them in Isha. So now the second time he's praying with an intention of Nafal prayer. He's already prayed his Isha behind the Messenger. But all of his people in his area, this is their first time. They are praying their Isha prayer. So this is an example that occurred at the time of the Prophet ﷺ with the companion Mu'adh ibn Jabal radiyallahu anhu, and he used to do that. So this proves you can have the nafal intention and the people behind you can have the obligatory intention, and the prayer like that is valid. What if somebody says though, that was Mu'adh ibn Jabal who used to do that? Maybe the messenger didn't know that this is what he does. Did anybody tell the messenger about that? Did Mu'adh tell the messenger that afterwards when I finish with you, I go back and I lead them in prayer? There's nothing in the hadith that the messenger was ever told what Mu'adh was doing. So maybe what he was doing was incorrect. How do we know?
If it was incorrect, then revelation could come down to the Prophet.
There's a principle. It's not possible that actions were being done at the time of the Prophet ﷺ that were contradictory to the Quran and the Sunnah, except that revelation would highlight that to the messenger. It doesn't occur that the companions were doing bid'ah or innovations or anything like that. It cannot occur. If the companions were falling into some error, even in the absence of the messenger, so the messenger wasn't there to see it, he would still know about it, revelation would come to him. So we know that this occurred at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and so what occurred at his time, if it was wrong, then revelation would have come to highlight that to the messenger, that this is what the companions are doing, they pray with you, then they go lead the prayer again, and it would have been clarified. So the fact that it occurred at the time of the Prophet ﷺ and no revelation came, no further clarification came, then it highlights that it was permissible and correct. Yeah, there's a further evidence anyway, you're right. There is further evidence which absolutely concrete highlights that the messenger was aware of Mu'adh ibn Jabal and his recitation, etc. But the principle being, if somebody said, no, that's another story, that's a different narration, whatever. The principle is there, that regardless, it was at the time of the messenger, so it cannot be that this was a mistake and revelation did not come. And then further evidences just solidify it further. That brings us to the end of the section regarding the conditions of the prayer. That's the section regarding the conditions of the prayer. So we've now gone through all of those conditions of the prayer. The first condition that we began with was what then? The entry time. That the time of the prayer must have entered. And remember, the definition of a condition first. The conditions of the prayer, the definition of a condition was something that has to be present prior to the prayer beginning and must remain present up until the end of the prayer. Something that is there before you start praying and remains there up until you finish praying. So, with the entry time, I suppose you could say there are narrations to highlight an exception to that, because with the entry time, if you manage to catch one raka'ah before the entry time finishes, then you've caught the prayer. But still, the point is, the condition has to be there before the prayer starts. If you don't catch your first raka'ah before the time goes out, then you haven't caught the prayer, the condition's gone. So the first condition was the prayer time must have entered. Then the second condition we did after that Anybody remember? Purification. The second condition we covered was regarding the purification. Purification from the minor impurities, purification from the major impurities, minor impurities being the wudu, major impurities being the ghusl, all of those purifications, both of those purifications. The third condition we covered was, so connected to purification, but being free of impurities. Being free of impurities in three things: in your body, in your heart is your intention, but physically, three types of purification in your actual body have to be free of impurity. Your clothes have to be free of impurity, and the place where you're going to pray has to be free of impurity. Then the fourth condition we spoke about was covering the awrah, covering the areas of the body as a minimum that are needed for the prayer. Then the others we did today. The fifth condition was facing the qibla. The sixth was the intention, and the seventh was, there wasn't a seventh. So the sixth was the intention. So those are the six mentioned as the conditions of the prayer required and needed for the prayer to be valid. That's where we'll stop today then. We'll start the new chapter next week. And the new chapter next week starts with the actual description of the prayer now. So now the conditions are there. Now you're going to start praying. What do you do? How do you raise your hands up to where do you raise them? Here, 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 touching the ears, this way, that way, fingers. Everything now detailing how you actually pray from the beginning to the end. So we'll go through all the sections and they tell you everything about where to put the hands here and afterwards on the chest, how to go into prostration with your knees first or your hands first. When you come out of the ruku', you put your hands back here, hands by the side, all of the different topics regarding the prayer step by step, exactly how to pray. Inshallah ta'ala, we'll begin with that then from next week. And next week will be possibly coming 15 minutes earlier again because of Maghrib, so 7:45 p.m. next week, inshallah ta'ala. 7:45 next week. Any questions?
I have a question about, you mentioned about changing intention during the prayer. So say it's Ramadan, you're praying with them, and you realize, I've actually got a bit more time to pray another Tarawih Nafil. Can you change the intention in that situation?
That would seem to be okay, because the night prayer is a general open night prayer. Pray as many nafil as you want. Yes, there are opinions of the scholars sticking to only 13 maximum with the witr, but many scholars have the opinion it's open, you can pray as many as you want. And some scholars even say if you ended up praying witr and then later on in the night you wake up and you think, let me pray some night prayer, but you think, but I already prayed witr. So they say then in that case you can add an extra rak'ah to make the witr, or the witr you're going to pray, to make that into an even number. So that would be okay to continue that as a nafil and then do your witr at the end again. Anybody else?
I had one situation. I was praying my two sunnah after Maghrib. This was in a masjid in Qatar. Someone came and assumed I was praying Maghrib, so he joined me. Now, because he joined me, I just started reading out loud, and I finished my salah. Is that the right thing?
That's okay. That's exactly what we said here. So you're now praying a nafil intention, and he's praying his obligatory intention. Perfectly okay, no problem. And yes, you read out loud now because you're now on the intention of the imam for that prayer. All right, we'll stop on that for today then. Inshallah ta'ala, next week at 7:45. وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.